everybody, and welcome to this watercolor painting tutorial. Today we're going to be painting this beautiful lemon, and what I've done is I'm starting out by making sure that I'm thoroughly wetting my paper. It's really important that we take just as much care with applying the water as it is to the paint. Now I'm going to drop in a very light wash of lemon yellow and cadmium yellow. I'm only wetting and applying the paint to a few segments at a time, and then I'm wetting the next area and moving along. I can't wet too much of my paper in one go because I'm living in a really hot climate and it would just dry out far too quick. I'm coming to you from Queensland in Australia, and I'm taking note of the photo reference, and I'm trying to work out where the light and the dark areas are. I'm doing the same on this section of this lemon and being really careful with applying my water, and I spend quite a lot of time on that, making sure that it has time to fully absorb into the paper, and that way when I apply the paint, blends into the paper nicely, sinks into the paper nicely. So I've used the same lemon colours and added some yellow ochre because it's a little bit of a darker area. Just taking note to look at my photo reference. I'm now doing the same and thoroughly wetting this leaf. Just giving a chance for that water to absorb into the paper. The greens that I use throughout this whole painting are sap green and hooker's green. So I kept the same yellows that were on my palette and I just dropped both of those greens into that mix. I'm now rinsing out my brush and drying it quite thoroughly on the paper towel, and I'm pressing the brush quite firmly into either side of that central vein to try and take out the paint from that central area. I've added some ultramarine blue, and I'm dropping that into the areas where we have shadow and also the veins. I'm now working on the outer edge of the lemon, and I'm keeping one side, the furthest side, nice and crisp, but I'm trying to add little dollops and random little dots of paint on the inner side. And then once I've applied that, I rinse out my brush and dry it off on the kitchen napkin, and I just soften that area to try and soften those areas. Now this is quite a bright yellow part of the lemon, so I'm using a lot more of the lemon yellow in this part. And these brushes are great. This is a size for round brush, but they've got a really nice point to them. So you can get into all of those little areas. I'm now taking my time to wet this whole area as well. And you can see there when I'm moving around the paper, you can see that sheen on the paper. That's a good way for the paper to look. It's how you can tell that it's got a nice even application of water, but we don't want to have any drips or any runs or anything like that. Now I've put some yellows and some yellow ochre and a little bit of orange out on my palette so that I'm all ready for the colours that I need for this section. Where the lemon is the brightest, I'm just using the lemon yellow and a little bit of the cadmium yellow. And then when I look at the reference photo, I can see that at the top and the bottom, slightly darker. So I'm going to drop some yellow ochre into those areas. And if I take that lemon colour further than I need to, it means that when I drop that next colour in, the yellow ochre that I'm doing now, they should mix together nicely. And in this area, I'm just taking it down further than I need to as well. Ensuring that we get a nice blend. And then I'm going to pick up the orange and drop this into the area where there's some shadow and those little dimply dots. And now we're just taking the same colour and with a very fine line, we're going around that outside edge of the lemon rind. And now I am making sure that I wet the paper thoroughly for this leaf. And the reason we want to do that is I want the colours to blend into each other. I want it to be soft. And also it's because this is our first wash. And so we want that to be the lightest in colour. And therefore if we use the colour on damp paper, it will be lighter. All these colours are our first layer, and we're going to be applying further layers on top. Now we're using more of the Hooker's green on this leaf because it's the darker leaf. and I'm getting some yellow ochre on my brush, and I'm dropping it straight in on top of that green. And what happens is the colors just mix together in a very unpredictable way, and it gives some beautiful effects. And that's what makes watercolor so beautiful. There's quite a lot of reflection from the lemon down onto that leaf, and that's why I've added the yellow ochre into the green. I've now added some of the ultramarine for underneath where the leaf is more in shadow and it's darker and cooler. And now picking up the yellow ochre because we're going back to the area where you've got the lighter and more reflected colour. I'm now adding paint to dry paper, and it is essentially the yellow ochre. And in the top area, I was trying to leave little gaps for the little highlights that you get through the detail in the lemon. When I applied it in that way, I thought that it didn't look quite right. It looked a little bit too heavy, and I did want some definition, but it just looked too harsh. So I'm getting a little bit more water on my brush, and I'm sort of trying to lift out some of the colour, and I'm trying to drag it down further into the lemon because I think I've got a little bit too much paint at the top. So I'm trying to just lift that out and spread it down. And I think that that looks better than the way it was before. And trying to sort of indicate the direction of those segments, and rinsing out and drying off my brush and lifting out a little bit of the colour. And now I'm making the area underneath the leaf where it's in shadow slightly damp, and I've created a colour with the yellow ochre and some of the ultramarine blue, and I've just gently dropped that in. And now I'm using the same colour mix, and I'm outlining the top of that seed, and then I'm rinsing out my brush, taking out the water and spreading that colour out into the areas that are lighter in the seed. And then I realise in a second, well now, that I'd actually missed out drawing in the other seed. So I just take a second to draw it in roughly. So I've got the rough shape. And now I'm more or less doing the same thing, but I've added a little bit too much water. So I've dried off my brush and I'm just almost vacuuming out that water and dropping in a little bit of darker colour. And now I'm going over the whole entire painting with my rubber, and I'm taking out the pencil. And this little eraser is really good. It's got a really nice shape to it. And so I'm just making sure to erase as much of the pencil as I can. And now we're working on the segments again, and I am leaving a few little gaps where I can allow the underwash to peek through. So we're not doing a complete even wash completely over that section. I'm leaving a few little areas for the highlights. And I just make my way around the segments. I look at my photo reference and make some areas darker. I make some areas lighter. Some areas sort of blend into each other. So I'm making my way around all of these segments, and when I reach this area at the top, I rinse my brush out and I get some clean water on my brush, and then I take out most of the moisture in my brush, and I just try and soften these areas at the top that have got some really hard lines. So I'm trying to work out those hard lines a little bit, just trying to soften in areas. This is called an eradicator brush, and it's a short, stiff nylon synthetic brush, and it's very good for taking paint out of your painting. The way that you use them is that you use it on dry paper, and you wet the brush, take out most of the water so it's just damp, and then you work it back and forth into the paper to remove the paint. I do that in that area just to try and take out some of the paint in the area of the sections where we've got the dividing lines. I'm trying to lift out the highlight in those sections. They work very well for that type of thing. I'm now using my really tiny brush, which this is a 00, and this is by Winsor and Newton. And I love this brush, and it just allows me to get into that area, which is quite a small area. I'm now using essentially lemon yellow on its own to brighten up this part of the lemon, as this is the brightest part. And I take the paint further than I need to, so that I've got some damp paper and that part of the area covered, so that when I drop in the next colour, they will mix together nicely on the paper. Now I'm taking the yellow ochre mixed in with some of the cadmium yellow and yellow ochre, and they will mix together nicely on the paper now. And getting up nice and tall on the point of the brush to get the definition on that sharp, rounded area of the lemon. And trying to get some detail on the edge of the lemon rind. And blending it out just a little bit. Dropping in a little more colour to define the edge of those segments. And going in the direction of these segments as well, to try and indicate the shape. And now dropping in some more colour at the top of the lemon. We've got the yellow ochre mixed in with some orange. And trying to do the little dimples that are in that section. When we reach the bottom of this section, I add a little bit of red to the mix. And blend it all out. And I drop in a few of those little dots with a dark colour. When I say a dark colour, I mean what was probably sitting on my palette where I'd mixed some colours together, and it would have been the yellow ochre, and maybe I mixed a little bit of the ultramarine and maybe some of the orange to create that kind of dark colour. And blending it all out. Now I'm dropping the green mix into this leaf, and I drop the various different tones that I need where I see them, and then I blend those together. So at this stage I turn around my paper so that I can access that part of the leaf easier, and I paint in a sharp line down the center for the veins, and I've used a dark mix of Hooker's Green and Ultramarine. I do go back in a second and I soften those slightly. And now I'm adding a glaze over the top of this leaf, where I'm using a very watered down version of the lemon yellow, and I'm dropping it just in the areas where I see that it's brighter. And a glaze basically means that it's a watery mix, and it allows me to basically brighten the area up without disturbing the layers that are underneath. And there I'm just trying to soften out those veins a little bit. And now I'm dropping in some more greens where I see that it needs to be on the photo reference. And in these areas that are more in shadow, I've added some more ultramarine. I'm just blending it out into the rest of the leaf and softening. So now at this point, it's had a really good dry. I've got some clean fresh water, which is always a very good idea. And I've done that a few times throughout this painting, because you need to keep your paint palette nice and clean to ensure that your colours stay nice and fresh. So at various times throughout this painting, I have actually cleaned my palette and got fresh water. So I'm using my tiny little brush. I love this brush, and I am adding some white gouache where I want to brighten up or tidy up little edges. I'm basically going around and just making little tiny finishing touches. I'm working now on this area of the lemon rind, where you get those little round areas in the lemon rind.